Ours is a Spanish story this time. So let's get in the proper spirit with the proper greetings. Saludos, amigos. Has it ever happened to you that you have planned and dreamed, and then suddenly you've had your plans blow up in your face? You were hoping for a certain something, and instead you get something quite different. You're very naturally disappointed. Maybe you're discouraged. You might even be a bit vexed. But wait a minute. The situation may not be quite as bad as it seems. Maybe that unexpected something is going to turn out better than you had anticipated. Maybe it's even going to be better than what you had originally planned on. It can happen that way. It does happen that way. And I've got a capital example for you. Let's go back. In 1492, Columbus set out and hoped to find a westward route to the Indies. Actually, as we know, he didn't. But he thought he did. He went back to Spain and proudly announced that this was what had happened. And all Spain believed him. Spaniards were enthusiastic. They began to think of themselves as the replacements for the Italian middlemen. Very naturally, they probably even began to spend the money that they felt was going to be theirs. And there was an added thrill with this belief that they had found the East. Here their Portuguese neighbors for almost a century had been working, had been trying, had been planning, had been boasting. And now Spain beats them to the punch. Oh, the poor Portuguese, said the Spaniards. But if it had to happen, it couldn't happen to nicer people. And then the dream blew up. Within a few years, as people followed Columbus to the New World and began to look around, the conviction grew that he had not discovered a new world. He had not discovered the East, he had discovered a new world. There were giant land masses blocking the way. So far, the Portuguese had the laugh on the Spaniards. In 1499, their Vasco da Gama came back to Lisbon with a rich cargo of goods that he had picked up in Calicut. And to date, no Spanish galleon had come back with anything approaching that. The new world that Columbus ran into was a distinct disappointment. And it seems that about that time, there was a serious glut on the Spanish market of good but slightly used dreams. And the advertising science hadn't developed to the point of figuring out the singing commercials, so these dreams weren't moving. So, well, the Spaniards were chagrined, they were disappointed. But they decided, okay, we're caught. Let's see if we can't make the best of it. Now, they'd already put a few settlements on Hispaniola. But these originally had been intended to be nothing more than way stations, a place where they could stop, catch their breath, refit, and then move on to Cathay or Sipangu, the Spice Islands, someplace in the Orient. Now they decided they better be a bit more serious and start looking around. Maybe fortune might smile on them yet, even though fate had played them a very, very cruel trick. Now, it was toward the end of the first decade of the 16th century that they began to edge round. Here is Hispaniola. This is more or less the mother of the Americas. Now, they moved over to the east and overran and conquered Puerto Rico. Then they came down to the west, southwest if you will, and conquered and settled Jamaica. Very soon they would move over to conquer and to occupy Cuba. But before they did, in 1509, two expeditions set out from Hispaniola heading for the South American mainland. These were headed in one instance by Ojeda and in the other instance by Diego de Nicuesa. Ultimately, they fused, they pooled their resources. They built a settlement here at Darien on the isthmus, and then began to prospect around, to look around. It was from Darien in 1513 that Vasco Nunez de Balboa, after a very hard trip, ultimately got to the top of the ridge and looked down upon another bit of disappointment. Here was, and he could tell from the tides, here was a tremendous ocean on the other side of the Americas. So not only were there two land masses, the North and the South American continents, but there was a great ocean beyond. Now, belatedly, Columbus would be proved correct. Magellan would do that job when he and his expedition sailed out and circumnavigated the globe, went to the south of South America, went on across the Pacific. He showed them how tremendous this ocean was. Then, though he lost his life, his expedition got back to Spain, and this proved that you could get to the east by sailing west, 1523. But a few years before that, the Spaniards had their views rather radically changed. And that is the great story. It's one of the really great human stories that is connected with the history of North America. Now, in 1511, the Spaniards had moved over and they had conquered Cuba. It had taken them about 4 years to do the job because the natives there put up quite a resistance. 1517, they established their capital up here in the north, the famous city of Havana. After a few years, however, when there was no more excitement, some of the conquistadors of Cuba began to be just a bit restless. And in 1517, a group of them under Hernandez de Cordova decided that they would get permission from the governor to do a bit of prospecting, a bit of island snooping, if you will. Now, instead of going up here to the Bahamas, as they very frequently had done before, they decided that they would pull westward. And their trip took them along the coast of this Yucatan Peninsula. Now, here, a great surprise was waiting for them. They came in contact for the first time with this magnificent Maya civilization, probably the greatest, or certainly one of the greatest, that the Americas had to offer. They were given a rather rough reception by the Mayas, and most of the men either were killed or were wounded, but they got back to Cuba to report. They had seen great cities, great monuments. The people were clothed in woolen garments. I should say woven garments, woven cotton garments. You don't wear wool down in that part of the country. And this heightened the Spaniards' hopes. In the next year, the governor, Diego de Velazquez, sent his nephew, Juan de Grijalva, westward to see what he could pick up. He confirmed the earlier story of the Mayas, and then went on. He sailed on down through the Gulf of Campeche and pushed on up the future Mexican coast, and here, or from this voyage, he brought back knowledge that not only was there a Maya empire, but there was what seemed to be a much healthier and possibly even a richer empire within the heart of Mexico. And as evidence, he showed about 20,000 pesos of gold that the Indians had given him along the coast. Now, all of this gave greater promise than the Spaniards had hoped for up to this time. And so the governor almost immediately designates one of the young men of the colony who had accompanied him in the conquest, Hernan Cortez, designated him as the leader of an expedition that would reconnoiter still further, and possibly even conquer this new empire that they had discovered. Now, this Cortez is a very fascinating character. He comes from a relatively good family. He had something of an education. Actually, he was in first-year law school, and rumors of what was happening in the Americas began to get back to him, and he decided that there was much more opportunity in the Americas than in a legal career, so he sold his law books and made for the islands. He settled down to some extent in Hispaniola. Then when the conquest of Cuba was being organized, he went on that conquest as secretary to Velazquez. He made quite a bit of money, amassed quite a bit of wealth, and at this particular time had the rather important post of alcalde mayor, or mayor, of one of the southern cities, Santiago. Given this opportunity, he immediately liquidated his fortune and brought in a number of companions. There were to be 11 in all. And they pooled their fortune and began to organize the expedition. They had 11 ships. They recruited about 500 men. They had a certain amount of ordnance and, very importantly, 16 horses. Just about the time that they were ready to set sail, word came down from the governor calling Cortez to the capital. The governor countermanded the order, allowing him to head the expedition, and it was at this point that Cortez had to make a decision. He had his whole fortune tied up in it, and the fortune of these other captains of his. Now, he was pretty certain that Velazquez was going to take him out of it. He probably would never get his money back. So he decides, okay, we will not listen to Velazquez, but we'll go on and do the conquest on our own, even though we may have to do it with outlaw status. And so he does. And thus begins one of the great epics in history, but certainly one of the great epics in American history. Let's follow him very rapidly. He pulls on over here and stops at this little island off the coast of Yucatan, the island of Cozumel. Now, here he has his first great stroke of luck, and he's going to be lucky all the way down the line. One of the earlier expeditions had captured 2 Indians and brought them back to Cuba, and these Indians had been trained to be interpreters for further exploration. One of them happened to die just before the expedition set forth, and the other one, as soon as he got near enough to his own country, went off to the hills. Cortez was without what the Spaniards say a tongue, una lengua, an interpreter. But just when they were about ready to leave here, barreling down the beach comes a rather bedraggled individual. About the only way that they can tell he's a Spaniard is that he has a beard. And he waves at them, and it turns out to be a Spaniard who'd been shipwrecked there. He and one of his other companions had managed to keep themselves off the native menu, and he was hoping for the possibility of rescue. This was Geronimo Aguilar. He joins the expedition. Now, he knows the Maya tongue. The expedition goes on around here through the Gulf of Campeche and stops down in the bottom of the Gulf at the point known today as Tabasco. Now, the previous expedition had been very well received there, and so Cortez figures, okay, this is a spot to call, sort of a hospitality center. However, different orders have come down from the capital, from Montezuma, and instead of receiving them with open arms, they begin to throw their spears and their arrows at them, and the Spaniards have a bit of a bad time. Now, however, the Spaniards outmaneuver the Indians, and it's at this point that Cortez sees the tremendous advantage of his horses. In the heat of the battle, his infantry ranks open, and this dozen or so horsemen charge in and strike terror among the Indians. Now, as part of the payoff, I guess you'd say, the native chief gives the Spaniards a certain number of Indian maidens, and among whom is an Aztec girl who has been sold into slavery by her parents, Doña Marina. She knows Aztec and knows Maya. Aguilar knows Maya and Spanish. The chain of interpreters is already set up. Cortez goes on up here and decides to stop and founds the city of Veracruz. It's here at Veracruz that the first real contacts are made with the Aztecs from the highlands. Montezuma, feeling that possibly these men are the emissaries of an earlier culture hero, Quetzalcoatl, whom the predecessors of, whom his own predecessors had run out of Mexico, and who, as he left, threatened that he, or his men at least, would come back to avenge him. These strange creatures, these creatures white of skin, bearded and so on, coming in these giant ships. Montezuma wasn't so sure but what this prediction might not be coming true. And he didn't want to play with it too much, but he wanted to try and ease the Spaniards out. Now, he sent down a group of ambassadors to greet them, to hope that they would have a safe journey home and the like. And he figured maybe we can encourage them to go. And he sent them gifts, feathered headdresses and so on, but two of the things proved to be a great mistake. He sent them a rather sizable disc of hammered gold and another one of hammered silver. You know what the Spaniards said? Caramba! If they've got this much that they're giving it away, ye gods, they must have much more than that up in the hills. This is no time to leave. So Cortez thanks them and says that he's the representative of the emperor. He has to see Montezuma to give Montezuma the emperor's regards, and he just sticks around. There's an exchange of ambassadors. Montezuma sends some of his, what you might say, the Aztec press photographers down to sketch pictures of these strange beings, take them back to the highlands. Cortez, in the meantime, pokes around in this area, picks up as much information as he can about the empire in the highlands, and he learns two or three things that which he's going to put to good use. For example, he learns that many of the subject peoples of the Aztecs hate the Aztecs. And therefore, shrewdly, he said, we can just get some of those boys on our side, we'll make up for our lack of numbers, and we may have may enjoy the possibility of success, and he does just that. He lands here at Veracruz in April. He stays there on the coast until August, then begins the long trek up the eastern escarpment into the central plateau. Along the way, he meets and wins, after a battle, he wins them as his friends, the Tlascalans. Then, bulwarked by them, they move on through the present site of Pueblo. They see the two great volcanoes that flank Mexico City on the west, the Sleeping Lady and Popocatépetl. Then move on, and before their eyes, there opens up this magnificent scene. Mexico, or Tenochtitlan as it was called in Aztec days, is there in the middle of a lake, Lake Texcoco. The lake has since been drained, not too successfully. That's one of the reasons why currently some of the buildings in portions of Mexico City are sinking at the rate of not simply feet, but not simply inches, but feet each year. Here it was, connected by causeways. Now, the point is, get down there, see if you can break across. And he gets down there, and Montezuma, who now figures, okay, the fates are against me, I might just as well go out and meet this individual, see what kind of a deal I can make with him. A New World emperor meets the vassal of an Old World emperor, and the conquest is merely a matter of time. Cortez and the group move into the city. Before long, before there was a Lindbergh law, they do the first American snatch. And they kidnap Montezuma. And then they say, all right, Monty, here's what you're supposed to tell your people. We punch this button, you tell them this, and Monty has to go along. Now, things are going great. The Spaniards, their eyes are popped wide open. This is it. Fairy tales can come true. They've come true before their eyes. Things are going fine. And Cortez is just trying to get himself settled so that he can send his lieutenants out to scour the country when word comes up from Veracruz. The old governor, Velasquez now, is pretty irked. And so he has sent an expedition over to Veracruz with orders to arrest Cortez as an outlaw and bring him back. Cortez ultimately goes down to the shore, down to Veracruz, and wins these men. One thing he does before he leaves is simply this. He puts the lug on all the boys up in Mexico City. He said, now, kids, fork over whatever gold and instruments, ornaments and the like you have. We're going to use this as bribes. And then he goes down to Veracruz and circulates among these men, and he said, now, how would you like to be cut in on something like this? Here, take this as a sample. Well, you know, human nature. They'll go along. So they say, Narvaez, who was their captain, sorry, Butch, we're leaving you. We're going with this new guy. And Cortez, greatly encouraged, new reinforcements now comes on back to the capital. But the capital is jumping. He's left the capital in charge of one of his lieutenants, an excellent chap, but he's a rather impetuous individual, Pedro de Alvarado. And Pedro de Alvarado, during Cortez's absence, has managed to estrange the Aztecs. The Aztecs more or less bring up a test case. Cortez had told them, all right now, boys, from here out, no more human sacrifices. Yeah, but, senor, we always sacrifice captives at one of these great feasts. All right, that's it. No more human sacrifices. All right, they're going to make a test case when Cortez is gone, and Alvarado gets wind of it and cuts them down rather successfully. When Cortez gets back, the Spaniards are in state of siege. And they allow Cortez to come in because they figure, okay, more white victims for our gods. Ultimately, Cortez has to leave. And he tries to sneak out, but somebody tipped them off, and they catch the Spaniards as they're trying to go across the causeways. It's the famous event which the Mexicans refer to as the sorrowful night, La Noche Triste. He goes on back to Tlaxcala, regroups, reinforces his small army, and then 2 years later, in 1521, returns and this time captures the city. Now, the story after this moves very rapidly. But here is a handful of men who have carried through a very daring enterprise. From there out, his lieutenants move out to spread the conquest, and then other Spaniards, hoping that they can find a similar, un otro Mexico, 7 golden cities and so on, spread all over the continent, Ponce de Leon, Narvaez, Cabeza de Vaca, Coronado, De Soto, those stories you know well. How they spread over, explored the southern part of the United States, but found nothing but disappointment. No rich cities, no rich mines, and came back a somewhat disappointed group. But even though these people were disappointed, the Spaniards now had really hit the jackpot because Mexico began to pay off, and to pay off very handsomely. This is a great story. All we could do was sketch it. Let me suggest several books that would carry the story. Here's one, The Spanish Conquerors by Irving B. Richmond. Short, easy to read, well done. though it goes more broadly than the Mexican story and the subsequent expeditions. Here is, I can't find the title page of this book, but it has one, The Explorers of North America. We'll come back to this on several other occasions. John B. or Bartlett Brebner. This is a fascinating book. Then another general book on some of the important Spanish conquerors, not only in North but in South America, the Spanish Conquistadors by F.A. Kirkpatrick, an English author who does an excellent job. A rather general work on the activities of the Spaniards in North America is this old but very excellent book by Edward Gaylord Bourne, Spain in America. Highly recommended. Then I can't recommend too highly. Now, this is not my favorite author in the sense that we have talked about in the past. I can't recommend too highly this delightful account of the conquest of Mexico. It's the true history of the conquest of Mexico by Bernal Diaz del Castillo. Let me give you in just a word the story of this. Bernal Diaz was one of the companions of Cortez. He fought through the whole campaign with him and then settled down to live a pleasant life, to enjoy his wealth in Guatemala. Then came, so to speak, an official account of the conquest, written by Gomara. And Bernal Diaz read it, and the old man, he was very sympathetic. He loved Cortez, but he said, "Caramba, this is not what happened. Maybe I better tell them for posterity what happened." So I write La Verdadera Historia de la Conquista de Mexico, and it's one of the real delightful chronicles of all times. But get hold of it, and it'll keep you up nights. Now, when a guy hits the jackpot, people begin to be envious of him. And next week, we'll see how Spain's friends, in quotation marks, become envious of her, and they begin to do some high-class 16th century hijacking. That's all for now. See you next week.